Welcome everybody to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program. Please help me welcome Gerard Gaskin as tonight's guest speaker. Gerard's work is widely published in newspapers and magazines such as the New York Times, Newsday, Politiken, Black Enterprise, Ebony, and Teen People. Exhibitions include Duke University Gallery, the African American Museum in Philadelphia, the Brooklyn Museum, the Queens Museum of Arts, Galvanize in Port of Spain, Goethe Institute Accra, and La Fototeca de Cuba. His photographs are included in the permanent collections of Duke University, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., the Museum of the City of New York, and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Please help me welcome Gerard Gaskin to our lecture series.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gerard Gaskin. I'm a photographer. Been a photographer, since, say, around 1991, I would say. I first wanted to kind of talk about people that I love and people that, in some ways, I basically stand on their shoulders. Being an African American photographer in the U.S., there are names that I think, photographers, especially the photographers who are into photography, should take a look at and be interested in. There's a gentleman named Stanley Green. There's another gentleman named Jules Allen, Roy DeCarava, James Vanderzee, Eli Reed, Bruce Tolliman, Anthony Barboza, Carrie Mae Weems, Charles Stewart, Noel Norton, and Ernest Cole. Noel Norton is considered almost like the father of photography in Trinidad, where I'm originally from, and Ernest Cole is from South Africa. Actually died here in the U.S., homeless on the streets of New York. And why I brought up these names, because I think it's very important to, as a young photographer, to figure out why it's important for you to have a voice, right? And these guys basically tell me to have a voice. They're the ones who say, like, oh, your voice is important, right? And that's the reason why I'm a photographer. I think the other names that I want to mention are people that were in my inner circle. The people that, when I was going to photograph the balls, they're the ones in some ways got me into the scene, got me connected, and then also worked with me, right? The person who introduced me to the real person who actually got me into the balls is a gentleman named Choir Fire. He was a makeup artist. He was, at one point, he was Whitney Houston's makeup artist. He's passed away now. And the next person is Douglas, who's actually in the audience. And Douglas was my in-person. Without Douglas, these pictures would have not been taken. He was my in-person. He knew what we would call the girls, what today, it's interesting how names change and processes change. Back in the day, they would be considered femme queens. Now, the real term is transgender women. And Douglas used to design clothes for all the mothers at the balls. And so how I got into the scene was I first started photographing individual photographs. Douglas would do the clothes and do the makeup and sometimes even do the hair. And we made these individual pictures of the main femme queens, the main mothers of the houses back in around 1993, I think. So he's very, very important. And then Kenny Yurkovich. Kenny worked as my assistant for a long time, for about, I say almost close to 10 years. There's a gentleman named Michael Robeson who is actually doing a PhD at Columbia, who in some ways became the person who I went to for advice about how I should structure the book, how I should kind of think about how the layout of the book should work. Jaylin Avisu is another person who then helped me find the people in the photographs that ended in the book. Because I shot all these pictures and then I was like, okay, I need to get model releases from these people. How do I get them? I mean, thank God I did this book in the age of Facebook and Instagram and these things, because that's ultimately how I got access. Jaylin, Derek, Ebony, Aisha, who in some ways is the person who started this new scene called the Kiki scene, who's anybody under the age of 23. Frank Leon Roberts, who wrote the afterthought in my book. Deb Willis, who was the one who gave me the prize to win. Edgar Rivera Colon is an anthropologist who did his PhD at Rutgers, and he was, those are the people in some ways were my kind of like brain trust, right? They knew stuff that, you know, I was just, I can't say I was just only the photographer, but I made sure that I put myself around people who had huge amounts of information about the scene and stuff like that. Albert Santana was the mother of the house of latex for about 10 years, and is the person who in some ways got me into the nonprofit space. I mean, him and Quietfire are two people on this list who have passed away now. Albert, I think, died in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, 2010. And then, of course, Junior LaBeija. I mean, I can name a lot of people. There's a gentleman named Marcel Christian who's also passed away, who I remember when I was starving and I couldn't afford to buy film, Marcel Christian would give me money to buy film. He just thought of how important my project was. So I wanted to throw out those names beforehand. I'm going to start. This is not a photograph I shot, but it's a very, very important person, because this person is Cristal Beija. And if anybody has seen Paris is Burning, Pepa LaBeija turns around and says, you know, I'm not the founder of the House of LaBeija, I just rule the house now. And Cristal Beija is the person who in some ways started modern day ballroom. She was being discriminated against in the kind of white pageant, and she's decided to basically start her own scene. And so I wanted to start with that picture. This is a picture of me before Selfies. I think I shot this picture in 1993. The femme queen who's sitting next to me is a femme queen named Monet. We actually met each other about 2 years ago at the Bronx Museum, and we shot another picture to kind of joke about how 25 years later we still know each other and stuff like that. That's how Gerard looked when Gerard started this project. You know, yeah, I used to have a little bit of a flat top, you know, a little Gumby back in the day. I don't know if you, but yeah. So I'm gonna show some pictures from my book. I think what I'll do is I'll show the first series of pictures, and then, you know, I might say a couple of words about the importance of each individual. I'll then maybe say some stuff about the images. I want to shout out somebody in the back, Carolina, who is sitting in the back, and Brian Palmer, two really good friends of mine. They came over and literally looked through, what, 600 pictures or something like that, right? Some crazy number, right? Something like that, right? And we tried to whittle it down to literally 150, and then that 150 we then gave to Duke, and then Duke then whittled it down to 90 pictures. The layout of my book, interestingly, kind of is designed around the idea of getting ready to go to a ball, going to a ball, participating at a ball, and then leaving a ball, right? So that's the trajectory of the design of the outlook of the book, right? This is a photograph that I shot at Jalen, getting ready to a ball in a hotel room in Washington, D.C. Another person who, in some ways, is an important person that gave me another set of access. Actually, the same day that I made this picture of Danielle Revlon, Danielle, we were going to a ball. We were going to probably the most important ball of the year. There's a ball called the year-end ball or the awards ball, and it happens every year. And they basically give out awards of people who have done amazing things through the whole year, right? So they'll say Mother of the Year, Butch Queen of the Year, whatever, you know, Runway of the Year, whatever. And so we were going to the ball, and the ball was in the Times Square area. And so we're in the cab. Of course, Danielle is paying. I'm not. Like I said, I was very poor and barely had any money. And so I shot this picture inside the delivery cab, or I mean, back in these days, they used to have these. You used to have a phone number, and you would call, and the cab would show up. And so we get to the ball, and of course we get to the ball late because Danielle has to have a serious entrance. And Danielle is the mother of the House of Revlon. And so they let Danielle in, and literally, basically, arm just kind of stops me right there. You know, back in the day, at clubs, they would have chains, right? And people would pick you to get into the club. I don't know how many older people in this crowd could remember those days. So I'm stopped, right? And Danielle reached back and grabs me and said, no, you gotta that's my photographer. And after that day of that incident, I have had pretty open access. I mean, I've had other people who've then helped me on the way, but that day was a huge, huge moment. I think the other thing is important is that I didn't, it took me over a year to make a real interesting picture at the balls. I was basically petrified at the balls. I was a young kid, still in college, thinking that it was going to be my senior project. And I remember I used to just take pictures of back of people's heads the whole time, right? I was literally petrified to even, yeah, it was a tough moment at the beginning, I would say. And like I said, Danielle pretty much changed. And a lot of my pictures, especially after this incident, became and got better and better and better and better. So now I'm just going to run through pictures. This is a picture I actually just shot like literally a month ago. They had a huge ball here that Rihanna, the music singer, put up all the money of all the prize money, and she basically gave away $10,000 on one category. This is supposed to be the trophies that people win when you win a category. I should say something about categories. At a ball, usually there are about maybe 30 categories at a ball. Balls are broken up into four different groups, right? There's what we call femme queens, and that's a person who is a trans woman, right? And it's called butch queens, and a butch queen is basically a gay man, women, and then butches, right? And butches are what we call trans men, right? And in context, that's the four breakdown. And then there are categories that are broken down in the midst of those categories, right? And it could be a runway category. I mean, now what the biggest and the most famous category is the voguing category. It's the dance category. The money category was actually face. that Rihanna gave the $10,000 away to. I don't use flash. I basically shoot available light. It's important for me to also get the audience. Audience participation in my pictures are, to me, the most important part of the picture. Not so much the actual action, it's the people behind them. I love that, I love people screaming. I mean, there are moments when I get quiet like this, but I love energy. I love seeing faces and spaces. I'll give you an interesting thing. I don't know anybody know Pose? Anybody seen Pose? So this is Electra sitting here from Pose. This is the person who won the $10,000 at the last ball. And what happens at a ball sometimes, that's how you know about what the next ball is going to be. Usually what happens at a ball, the tables, most people would drop advertisements for the next ball. Now with social media, it's all on social media. But back in the day when there wasn't any social media, that's usually how somebody would know about another ball. It's just like how that table's there and you got the advertising, right? They'll tell you, all right, we're having a ball in Philly at blah, blah, blah place. Sometimes I remember going to Philly one night and there wasn't a ball at the place that they said it was going to be. Then I was stuck in Philly all night. This is an executive realness category. And actually, that is him. Right? That's another thing. I've photographed people for 25, 26 years. So I know most of the participants. This is my conversation about HIV. I think it's important to talk about HIV. So another thing about there's a huge suicide rate in the ballroom scene. This gentleman right here committed suicide a year and a half ago. His family and him was struggling with his family not accepting him. Gerard H Beija. Gerald, for me, was one of the real political characters in the ballroom scene. He would be one of the only ones that I would see at an ACT UP event or some event around queerness or HIV or whatever. He would always be there and yelling and screaming. Wonderful character. I think died about 10 years ago now. No? We were talking about Paris Dupree. This is one of the last balls Paris did in Brooklyn. And this is Paris in the foreground, and that's Junior La Beija right behind. Right behind, there's another person named Hector Extravaganza who passed away, I think, last year? This year, January. Yeah. That's my cover. I'll give you an interesting story. Met him really quick, shot his picture, asked him to take his picture, shot him really quick, and then didn't think too much of it. I sent the picture with the whole selection of pictures to Duke University, and Duke came back and says, "This is going to be your cover." I was like, okay, let me go find this guy. And I remember it got real touch and go. I remember it's April, me and my wife at the time, my wife had gotten a teaching job in upstate New York, and we went up on April 1st to basically go and look for apartments in the central New York area. And Jay Lynn, who I told you I mentioned, who's the first person in the image, I said, Jay Lynn, you got to find me this person. I don't know who this person is, blah, blah, blah. So he sends me back. The guy's name is Taz. You can find him on Facebook, blah, blah, blah. I send a message to Taz. I say, Taz, call me up. Taz calls me. I'm in Syracuse. I run outside because we were in a place they were kind of inviting us and showing us around Syracuse. And I run outside and I'm like, Taz, they're going to put you on the cover of this thing. I need you to sign a model release form, blah, blah, blah. And I remember meeting Taz down at right by Macy's for him to sign the model release form. I said, I'll give you a book and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you're going to be a little bit of a celebrity for a while. And it's interesting because he's also there's a documentary that has come out recently called Kiki that kind of does the Kiki scene. And he's also the poster person for that thing. Really, I would think, very beautiful man. And so it was interesting that, 30 seconds, now we're pretty connected, I would say. And the other interesting thing is Marcus, who is the person behind, the shadow person behind it, is the person who designed the outfit. And he's also right now on Project Runway, this season of Project Runway, doing clothes design. This is Frank Leon Roberts. I talked about it. He wrote my foreword, and he also walks balls. He just walked the ball just recently as becoming the president, I think, or going up for office, I think. I think there's a picture of him with Obama, I think, that's been doctored. So that's my project on documenting the balls. I'm now working on book number 2, I think. It's kind of a portrait series, very much like I would say Avedon's American West. I'm not on white, I'm actually on gray. And I use 2 lights. I use one light that's 45 degrees, and then another one that's 45 degrees behind the person. So there's a direct front light, 45, and then there's another light that's coming from the other angle. And it shifts because of the space that I ultimately get at the balls. So I go to a ball, and usually what I do is I go to the ball with a backdrop, and with lights and my camera and all that kind of stuff, and I set up my little semi-studio. There's a gentleman here in the audience named Sean Drakes. I don't know, is on YouTube, you can find that, Sean? So he did a little, 8-minute piece on me kind of working through this process. Beyond Legendary is the name of the doc. So I also wanted to show you guys a little bit about how I make a living. I'm a documentary photographer, so of course then I do what you call documentary stuff. I'm shooting sometimes behind the scenes of a video, interview, doing events. I do a lot of stuff at the universities in upstate New York. I photograph a lot for Colgate University, and I also photograph for Syracuse University. So they basically hire me to basically document whatever the event is. So that's kind of, and then now what I'm starting to do is I'm also starting to do some ad work also. So I'm gonna show you a little bit about some of the new projects that I'm also working on. Actually, this is a real old picture, but it was behind the scenes with Bill Cosby before Bill Cosby got into trouble. Actually, this image was shot this year at an event with Kamala Harris. T.I. This is an image I shot back home in Trinidad. She's one of the only women groomers in the horse racing track in Trinidad. This is an image I shot in Sri Lanka. I'm also doing a series of pictures around the game cricket. I don't know if you guys know the game cricket. Like I said, I'm originally from the Caribbean, so I follow the West Indies cricket team, and I actually have the West Indies cricket team badge tattooed on my little arm here. My little arm, I said. And so I do series of pictures around cricket, and so I've gone to a couple of different places to photograph cricket, and this is one of the times. Of course, it's easy because I'm married to a Sri Lankan, so going to Sri Lanka is kind of easy. And actually, that's how I met my wife. I wanted to go to the World Cup, Cricket World Cup, and her cousin, who is a photo editor at National Geographic, was like, "You should talk to my cousin." And then it ended in what it is today. This is at the Women's March, right after the Trump inaugurations. I think it's the 10th anniversary of 9/11. You know, you guys know that only on 9/11 they actually open up the glass thing so you could see the Freedom Tower. I'm working on a series of pictures in upstate New York, photographing this family who have decided to start up a distillery in a small little town called Lebanon. And these guys, who are really smart kids, their parents are retired school teachers. Adam here went to Dartmouth, you know, like I said, well-educated kids. Aaron, the other one, went to Williams College. And so they basically moved back because their parents wanted to be closer to their grandchildren. And they've started a distillery in the town. It's called Old Home Distillery. You guys should look it up. The bigger they become, the better it's going to be. But no, they're really cool guys. And then what they do is they teach me a lot about country life. This is the other brother that I was talking about. Yes, Syracuse University and has a program around veteran entrepreneurship, and the woman was actually talking to her mentor in the program about the business that she was trying to start. It's funny, I shot this picture and I was looking at this guy and he was saying some funny thing and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't see this picture till like maybe months later. The other three guys were just cracking up on the other side. I also work for a company called the North Star Fund. Anybody with any serious kinds of money in the audience should give money to the North Star Fund. They're an amazing organization. They're like middle people. They get funding from wealthy people, and then they give it to grassroots organizations. Actually, a really nice guy named Rodney Green did a story around black professionals, golf pros, and he's one of maybe 10 in the United States. Syracuse marching band, Obama, Trump. I'll keep moving. I think she's running the Biden campaign right now. Was with Bernie last year, 2016. This is a play at Colgate University. Back home in Trinidad, 50th anniversary of independence, Trinidad and Tobago. Same Trinidad, it's an area called Paramay. Thank you, Sean. Like I said, part of my cricket story. Carnival in Grenada. No, Antigua, sorry. Trinidad. And then I also do portraits for a living for magazines, when magazines existed. This is some tear stuff. These are some ads I do now. These actually came out in January of this year. Boom. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. You said that the ballroom work first started as a college project.
Yeah.
What was actually the story of what led you to that culture?
Wow. There's the long story and the short story. Which one? So there's a couple of reasons, right? When I was 14 years old, my family's very, very religious, right? Grew up Catholic, and so I used to go to a Catholic after-school program at the church that I used to go to. And one of the people who ran the groups, right, at the thing, basically gave me a love letter and told me he was in love with me and that he sensed that I was in love with him. And it's the beginning of the idea, right? I was 15 years old, right? Fast forward 19 years old, right? I was basically hanging out on 42nd Street. When I say 42nd Street, was 42nd Street. And very shady and peep showish and blah, blah, blah. And I went down, there was a place called Show World. And I went downstairs in Show World, and that's where the Femme Queens used to work. And literally right around the corner from Show World, actually the same block that the old New York Times building was on, right? 43rd Street was, there's a famous bar there called Sally's. And at the time it wasn't Sally's because Sally's had burnt down. It was Sally's 2 that I think, it was like maybe 2 or 3. And so I started hanging out in Sally's 2 and watching a lot of the stuff that was going on in Sally's 2. a lot of trade basically was going on in Sally's too. And I was like, man, and at the same time, I have a cousin who lives in Toronto, who actually just passed away this year, but he had come out to the family, and he is born on the same day as I am, and his middle name is Gerard, right? And so all of those things were kind of leading up to, and I think right around that time, I was still kind of trying to figure out what my sexual orientation was, and I was like, the only way I could really, really do it is to kind of figure out how to then dive into a project that would feed into, of course I was going to school and I needed a final project and all those other things, but that was the kind of real catalyst, right? And then, like I said, I worked with a photographer named Jules Allen, is one of the names that I mentioned, and Quiafire worked with Jules. And Douglas, who's in the background, in the back, he used to sub when Quiafire, so when Quiafire was on the road with Whitney Houston, Douglas would come and do the makeup. And I was talking to Quiafire one afternoon. I was like, I'm trying to do this project, blah, blah, blah. And I said, man, I know the right person. And it's weird because we were on the phone, a three-way conversation, and we had a three-way with Quiafire. And I know my phone didn't have a three-way, so it was through Quiafire and me, Quiafire, and Douglas. And then that's how the whole thing. But it comes out of the 14-year-old kid first, right? And then it transitioned to it. I feel like every project that I do has a connection to who I am and what I am. I only work on those projects. You can't work on a project that you're gonna spend 10, 15 years on if you're not invested. Like, you have to have some kind of irk in you that say, all right, I wanna do this, I wanna explore this idea. And so I wanted to be into that. So that's how it kind of came about.
Hi, Gerard.
Hey.
I just want to know, what was it like? How do you compare years at the ball scene, right,
Right.
to today?
What's the difference now?
What's the major difference, and were there a lot of photographers when you were photographing compared to now?
Ooh, yeah. When I first started photographing the ballroom scene, there was one other photographer who was, like, I would say, a serious photographer, right? I mean, I think there's a huge difference. Even back then, there were a lot of people who had cameras and would come and who would participate and photograph themselves and that kind of stuff. Someone who was like really, really into documenting and wanted to then show their pictures and all that kind of thing. There's a gentleman named Brian. I can't remember Brian's last name. Lamtel, right? And who was the other photographer, right? And so it was just me and him. And I think the other thing, there were more videographers back then. There was like 3 or 4 guys who would shoot video with big, huge things, and they would all be stationary in the back. And Brian would hang out right by we call the judges table, and I would like to roam, because I like to kind of literally come from the back with the participant to the front and not be stationary in one place. And back then, the cool thing is that everything was on the ground level, right? The walkers was on the same level as the participants. Now that, if you see some of the new pictures I shared, they're like runways, and it's like Fifth Avenue, whatever, the catwalk stuff, right? Fashion Week, right, where everybody's elevated, right? Back when I was first photographing it wasn't elevated. People would, and then I think the other thing that I think, it's funny, I was coming here and I was thinking about what I would say, and I said, 75% of this game is access, right? You have to get access. I'll give you an example. I remember photographing the Million Man March, right? And one of my mentors, one of the names I put on there is a guy named Eli Reed. Now, Eli Reed was in the room with, when I'm trying to remember, who's the leader of Farrakhan? Like Louis Farrakhan. He's in the room with Louis Farrakhan before Louis Farrakhan walks onto the stage. He's in the room. Like, so now that's a picture that the dude who showed up and came down on the bus and blah, 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 is never going to get, right? So where do you find a project that you can get that kind of access? That's the kind of access that you need to then make pictures that are important. You cannot think. And so, now, 28 years, I have access, right? I can walk where most balls, I can pretty much, Gerard's here, Gerard's legendary or iconic or whatever they want to put me in the category, and they give me that kind of status and so on and so forth. But now there's a lot more young kids, and I'm good with that, right? I think there's a young kid in the Netherlands who's from Curacao originally, but now he's in the Netherlands, and he's photographing the European circuit, because now ballroom is everywhere. I mean, I get emails from South Africa to Costa Rica to Germany to the Philippines. I mean, balls are everywhere. Japan, any country you can name, there's a ball. And the interesting thing is, like, the real superstars from those spaces, when they're a huge ball here in the U.S., they try to come. So, I mean, like I said, they had a huge ball about a month ago. I mean, there were kids from all over the globe. I mean, I met a young girl from Costa Rica there. And I said, there's a young girl who's documenting the scene. She got in contact with me on WhatsApp. Do you know her? She said, yeah, I know her. She's a good friend of mine. Blah, blah. And so I think that's the difference now. Like, it's so much bigger. Back when I first started photographing the balls, there were maybe 6 balls a year. Now there's over 300. Right? There's sometimes there are 2 balls in a day.
Hi, Gerard.
Hey.
First, I'd like to commend you and give you kudos for the trajectory of what you have done in documenting unseen, alienated community that is relevant. I formerly modeled in the 80s and former director of communications at In the Life Media, which was a LGBT PBS show.
Right.
But I think it's very important that your consistency in covering this community makes it apparent that you can't deny that community, or this community.
Right.
My question is, you've seen the show Pose and how it sort of represents the community, the ballroom community. Can you speak to how different or like that show is with the real ballroom scene? And another question I have is, you decided not to reissue your book, and I wanted to know why.
Mm-hmm. All right, those are 2 tough questions. Okay, I think the difference between Pose and the real ballroom is Pose is a little bit of a fantasy, right? I mean, and also they're trying to. But what I have to say is that what they have tried to do is that they've tried to pick out these amazing events that have been in the past, and they've tried to then put it in to this Pose, and show it. Of course, they've changed the people who actually did it and blah, blah, blah. You know, they made little changes in how they then, what the real scenario actually happened, right? I think, you know, ballroom now is so big. It's so big that pose is just like it's almost just like, it's just part of the hand of this whole scene, right? It's, I mean, if you consider that like as a whole human being, right? You know, a couple of different people, right? So Twiggy, this is Twiggy. He finds the talent. He goes, and mainly most of the extras are ballroom people, right? I don't think he's a producer, but he helps in the coordinating of developing the talent, getting the talent. He also then is the choreographer, the walking of the runway, and so on and so forth. But it's a show, right? It's a show about 4 trans women. It's not about the ballroom scene. I mean, the ballroom scene, say in 1980, was about transgender women. Today, it's about butch queens. You know, butch queens run it. Butch queens control the scene. It's a much different space, I think.
It seemed more raw.
Yes. Yeah, and it's still raw here, but you have to kind of go and look for it, right? I mean, you know, when Rihanna does it, it's not going to be raw, but when Johnny in Kentucky does it, it's a completely different, or Detroit or wherever, then it's a little raw. It's a little raw there. It's not going to be raw somewhere else.
Hi, Gerard.
Hi.
I want to go back to the beginning when you were reading off the photographers that you admired so much. There's some names that were up there were fashion photographers, so I wanted to know, why didn't you follow that route? Because my relationship with you has always been fashion.
Right. That's a good question. You know, I never thought that I would be able to really get into the fashion business. I didn't think that if I decided to be a fashion photographer, and it's interesting because I used to have a really good friend of mine who used to work at Parsons, and he had MS, and he was a fashion photographer, and I really saw how he kind of wilted and passed away, right? And I was like, there's no way in Jose that I'm gonna put myself in a place where I can't really be successful. And to be honest, you know, one of the things about my career and how I've been able to work is that 90% of the people who hire me are black, right? I work because of black people. I don't work because of white people. White people don't hire me. I'll give you an example. Like, they just recently had a big show at about Stonewall, right? The 50th anniversary of Stonewall at the museum. What's that? No. It was at the museum right next to the Natural History. It's the Historical Society, right? Like, not to be boasting or anything like that, I'm supposed to be the most important person in photography around ballroom culture, right? I didn't get a phone call about that show, right? The guy who was in that show is the Brian guy that I mentioned, right? He was a white gay man, right? It's not me, right? White spaces don't even call me for shows around ballroom culture. Like I said, there was a 50th anniversary show. There was a show at the Brooklyn Museum. No one called me. The people who got in contact with me is the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., right? So I didn't really want to get into a place where they weren't, first of all, there weren't enough of us to say that then could help me then move up, right? And especially back in, I'll give you another interesting story. I remember when I used to go to magazines with my work, I used to, people we used to struggle to figure out who to hire me and what, and if they should hire me or not. And I remember back then, they used to have a thing, white photo editors didn't want to hire black photographers to do black stories because they said we weren't going to be objective enough, right? Like, that's how crazy it was back. And you know, I think it's lucky, we're lucky now that we have enough black and brown spaces in those spaces now that have helped change that idea. But that's how crazy it is in the world of photography. And so that's the reason why. And I mean, am I a good fashion photographer? I think I'm decent. I mean, if Douglas wasn't around, Douglas is the person who, you know, in some ways pushed me in that direction and wanted me to be in that space. But what it did for me, it helped me learn these skills, right? It'll help me be much more well-rounded photographer, a photographer that could do many things, where I wasn't just a guy who just kind of was dealing with just whatever available light there was, right? I could do many things. And in some ways, that's what fashion helped me do and learn.
Thank you so much, Gerard. That's all the time we have, but feel free to say hi afterwards.